Master Tactician is an achievement that seems difficult on the surface, but isn't too challenging depending on how you go about it. It's just time consuming. This isn't a start to finish guide, but more of a guide on the general concepts to get the achievement, but it is a little bit longer than my other achievement videos for Icewind Dale. Most of the individual area and encounters are covered either in the other videos on this playlist or in more detail elsewhere on the internet. I will give some general detail on specifically challenging parts I had in getting the achievement, such as major bosses and just generally difficult encounters. The way Heart of Fury mode works is, besides giving all the bonuses from Insane mode, all monsters get improved chance to hit, better saving throws, more attacks per round, and they get 3 times their hit points plus another 80 on top of that. So an 8 hit point goblin in normal mode becomes a beefy boy with 104 hit points in Heart of Fury. This effectively breaks the game, and it makes it more of a grind than a challenging strategical fight. If you know how to beat the goblin tactics normally and can do enough damage to kill him, now you just have to do over 3 times that much damage and make sure you have a character with enough stats to back it up. Starting up a new game with characters on Heart of Fury mode from scratch to get this achievement is a difficult task, and it's impossible for most players without extremely detailed knowledge of the game's systems, meta knowledge of both the monsters and item placement, and how to use some cheese to take advantage of both of those things. Which leads me to the first and most important of my tips for beating Heart of Fury mode. Something that isn't immediately obvious is that you don't have to start the game with new characters. If you've already beaten the game on an easier difficulty, you can actually just import your characters from another playthrough into a Heart of Fury one. For one, they'll be much higher level than normal, especially so if you did the expansion content. Second, they get to keep all their equipment you received in the first playthrough, except for like gem bags and things like that. For especially strong characters, you can even duplicate the characters themselves or even the items that they have to make an extremely overpowered team. For example, I had a Dwarven Defender character. It's a class kit of a fighter, which gives them the defensive stance ability, which gives 50% physical damage reduction and plus 2 bonus to saving throws. Really strong character, so I just made 2 of them on Heart of Fury mode. He also had a really powerful item, Axe of the Minotaur Lord, which gives a high chance to stun on every attack. So I got 2 of that item, along with everything else he had. Importing high-level characters doesn't automatically win the game, as the deck is still stacked against you and some fights are still just really tough regardless. But overall, the difficulty does come down to just an extreme grind fest as you whittle down extremely beefy enemies who can barely touch your tanks while one-shotting your squishier members. This monotony is broken up by several of the bosses, specifically Belafet and Pomab. Most of your damage will come from your fighting types. The change to hit points on monsters makes fighters much more useful. They're less likely to take a hit, they are less likely to die from a hit that they take, and they have consistent DPS. Between the extra hit points monsters have and their higher saving throws, physical damage is just going to be much more useful for offense than spells, as spells just don't do enough damage relative to enemies' health. The spells can be potentially saved against for no damage or half. They could have resistances to the damage types like fire or acid, and monsters can just walk up to your spellcasters and kill them in one easily landable hit. In my playthrough, I used 2 Dwarven Defenders for their get out of jail free card ability, the defensive stance. It reduces physical damage by 50%, so if they ever got close to being knocked down through their 200 hit points, I could stall with this ability while I waited for a heal from my priest. Mages essentially receive a nerf from this, as it makes a large chunk of their damage-oriented spells useless. Martial classes just do more damage over time hitting stuff. The hit points of all monsters was buffed. How much damage spells deal was not. This doesn't make mages useless, they're just relegated to buff, debuffing, crowd control, and summons. And while your party members don't get the HP buff that enemies do, anything you summon does, as it technically counts as a monster, so this mode also buffs mages. Any boss you fight, basically you want to have a wall of meat between you and them while you sneak in damage. A sorcerer with tons and tons of different summoning spells can pull their weight just as effectively even if they don't bring a lot of damage in the mode. Cleric's Turn Undead ability is a literal godsend, as it only scales with level and it doesn't care how many hit points the undead enemy has. If they fail to save, they're gonna run or they're gonna die. Pair this with multiple casts of heal with a capital H on a big tanky front line, like the 2 Dwarven Defenders I have, and they're worth their weight in gold. Plus fighting a zombie horde and watching your cleric make a Turn Undead roll that just chunks the entire group never gets old. As far as what spells I used, I didn't really do anything fancy. I got a lot of mileage out of high-level cleric spells. Heal and Regenerate were insanely useful on Dwarven Defenders with lots of hit points. Mass Cure Light Wounds was good too, as my cleric didn't have to be in melee distance to use it, but it wasn't an insane amount of healing. It was mostly just clutch heals for my squishier party members. I used tons and tons of summoning spells on my sorcerer, and occasionally I'd break out Improved Haste. I used Dispel and Breach every so often to speed up killing a mage, and just as an honorable mention, I liked Zone of Sweet Air as a good spell to have ready when you get Cloud Kill or Death Fog dropped onto your defensive position. Now, for about 60% of the game, my strategy was to just use my 2 Dwarven Defenders. They stood in the way and either were impossible for mobs to hit or tank the damage that the mobs put out. Then, if he got low on health, my cleric could use heal to get him to full health easily. If things got really dicey, he had his ability to reduce damage defensive stance. They were also a majority of the damage that I did to enemies, while the rest of my party plucked away with missile weapons. The 2 Dwarven Defenders I had accounted for about 25% of the kills each, and the rest of my party was the other 50%. For about 30% of the game, the portions with undead in them, which there are a lot of those locations, I had my cleric buffed to insane levels, and I just had him run around with Turn Undead ability on. Any undead that I couldn't just make explode, I had to resort to following up with strategy A. And finally, for the remaining 10% of the game, this strategy was what I would use to get past the really, really tough fights. I would find myself a corner or a choke point to tuck into, and then I would flood the entrance to that location with summoned monsters. I would aggro the enemies back into that spot, and then just use spells like Death Fog, Incendiary Cloud, Ice Storm, Fireball on top of where they clumped up. I did say before that damage spells aren't as strong as just the DPS that my fighters put out, but these types of fights, it came down to watching my army of summoned monsters slowly die as I summoned more to replace them, and it was a lot safer to use than putting my fighters in danger. And every little bit of damage helped over these long fights. There were 2 points in my Heart of Fury playthrough that I had to consistently reload over and over again to get through. Strangely, I thought Exonomai would be one of them, as she is one of the most difficult fights in my opinion in just a normal playthrough, but it turns out she isn't immune to being stunned. Both fights I had difficulty with were near the end of the game, the first being the fight with Polmab the Shopkeeper. Polmab summons 4 crystal sentries that not only hit very hard and are very difficult to kill, they just immediately get back up after you kill them. Palmab himself summons copies, and then he uses a lightning bolt wand to periodically fire it at you, which bounces around and hits multiple party members. Hitting a fake version of Palmab gains you nothing, but doing enough damage to the real Palmab removes one of the fake copies, and then you have to find the real one again. After you kill Palmab, the sentries fall, so it really isn't worth your time to focus on the sentries. Just kind of ignore them the best you can. Now, unfortunately, I don't have footage of the Heart of Fury fight, but I've got my regular playthrough on screen. I had trouble here on Heart of Fury because I couldn't kill Palmab fast enough before my party members got downed. No undead, so I couldn't use strategy B. Most of the time, the sentries will just ignore my summons and go for squishy characters. It's difficult to spam the monsters in this area because the sentries are fairly intelligent, and once they mow through your summoned monsters, they'll just go straight for squishy wizards and clerics, and with how small the area is, you end up stuck in melee with them, and 1 or 2 hits and your party member is dead. What I ended up doing is using the spell Mass Invisibility at the start of the fight, just to drop the aggro on my squishier party members. I ran them into a corner and had my Dwarven defenders start sorting through the Palmabs and drawing aggression from the crystal sentries. I summoned some backup monsters to act as the wall between the sentries and my squishy team members, and then I set each one to focus 1 Palmab each with their ranged weapons. Watch the dialogue window for when it says Palmab takes X damage from X character, and then figure out which copy that team member is attacking, and then set everyone to attack that copy, and then boom, 1 copy down. Now set everybody again to attack 1 each, and repeat that process. And the name of the game here is Speed. Palmab actually goes down very easily once you start hitting the real one. Now hands down, Belafet is the hardest fight in the game. On Heart of Fury mode, he gets slightly more difficult because he adds 2 demons to his side, on top of the 2 iron golems, on top of the buffs to himself, his hit points, his 2 hit damage, all that stuff. The difficult part of the fight, though, is that everyone except my fighters would die instantly if they were so much as touching anything here, and then my fighters would need that healing and support from my other members, as well as mobs of summoned monsters to not just die instantly to Belafet. The difficulty is, you start in a severely disadvantaged position, and your main goal in this fight is to get out of it. What I did is I summoned a mob of monsters in front of Belafet, and then again I used Mass Invisibility to drop aggro on the iron golems coming in from the sides. I retreated my party members into this little staircase, and I clumped my dwarves in the way, and then again started summoning monsters and slowly hacking away at the iron golems, and then the demons. You can use Zone of Sweet Air here to clear up your position, and just move slowly. Try to keep Belafet away from the fight until you're ready to go toe-to-toe with him. He is still a monster melee combatant, and be sure to keep his attention on monsters and not your party members. Once you get out of that death trap at the start of the fight, it basically turned into a strategy C fight. Once he goes down, the achievement will pop.
It shook the walls of the underground chamber. But the hero's moment of victory was short-lived, for as the form of their vanquished enemy lay broken